hola, and buenos dias, buenos tardes, or buenas noches, familia, depending on when you are listening to this podcast. You've tuned in to Tech and Tequila, the podcast where technology meets community and every conversation is paired with a good pour and some great vibes. I'm your techie chica, Kat Lopez Shelby. Before we dive into today's episode, I want to share some exciting news with you. And that is, of course, if you are ready to grow your podcast and build a legacy, I am inviting you to join me on October 23rd and 24th for the free Latinas in Podcasting Virtual Summit. Now, some of you may say, pero I'm not a Latina. Well, guess what? You don't have to be to attend. This is 2 days of hands-on tips, proven tactics that deliver real results. You'll leave not only inspired, but also with a concrete game plan to grow your show and your brand. So don't wait. Register now. The link is going to be in the show notes, and I will see you there. Now, of course, before we get into the meat and potatoes of this with Miss Maria, who you see here on the screen, we would not be Tech and Tequila unless we had a little tequila. So while normally I have a big, beautiful bottle, I don't know if you can tell, but I am outdoors today and they have a no glass rule. So I could not bring my glass tequila bottle out here. But for those who don't know, this is Mi Gente Blanco. So if you don't know anything about Mi Gente, it is 100% blue agave, grown from blue agave nectar. This is made in Jalisco, Mexico, of course, at the high altitude, which gives it its unique depth and flavor. Now, of course, it's additive free and sustainable because we don't like the Oogie Boogies to be in our tequila. We like it to be delicious and not leave us with hangovers. And of course, in case you are curious about what this Blanco tastes like, is you're going to have a little bit of like melon, peach, honey, and vanilla with just a hint of cinnamon. It's also double distilled. And of course, before you get your bottle, they rest it for 30 days. Now, Mi Gente launched in 2020, but it's already making huge names for itself. And of course, it's Mi Gente. We're in Hispanic Heritage Month, so why would we not be talking about Mi Gente or my people? Now, part of their mission, of course, is to honor tradition, support local communities, and build something truly special. So, of course, raise your glass. Here's to sustainability, flavor, tequila that brings people together, and, of course, protecting your business, because we're about to get in the meat and potatoes of that with Miss Maria here. Salud.
Are you ready to grow your podcast and build your legacy? Hi, I'm Pauletta Rado. I'm a podcaster just like you. And I'm inviting you to join us on October 23rd and 24th for the free Latinas in Podcasting Virtual Summit. You don't have to be Latina to attend. It's 2 days of hands-on tips and proven tactics that deliver real results. We promise you'll leave inspired and with a concrete game plan. So don't wait. Register now for the free Latinas in Podcasting Virtual Summit on October 23rd and 24th. There's a link in the show notes. Nos vemos.
All righty. Now, Maria, you have been on Tech and Tequila before, but for our new listeners or someone who doesn't per se know who you are, would you mind kind of giving us a background and, of course, a little bit more about your company?
Yeah, absolutely. But first, I would like to say it is Hispanic Heritage Month, and it's also Cybersecurity Awareness Month. So that is no coincidence.
I know, a double hitter. What can we say?
Well, thank you. My name is Marina Scamardo. I am founder and CEO of Praxis Security. And what we do is we are a governance, risk, and compliance firm. Now, that's a lot of words that don't make sense to a lot of people, but really governance is, governing a program, just like we're going to talk about today, is keeping up with it. It's a living thing, just like your taxes. You have to govern your taxes throughout the year. Same thing. Risk. We're going to be talking about that today and the purpose of some of the things that we do in a business to lower risk. You work all the time on your business to try to lower risk on things, and this is no different. And compliance. A lot of people, a lot of industries in different regulatory compliances, whether it's healthcare or financial or government work. You need to know what compliances you need to adhere to. So that's the GRC of Praxis Data Security. We've been operating for about 6, almost 7 years now, but I've been in GRC for longer than that. And one of my biggest passions is really helping organizations not only understand their risk, lower the risk, and build a security program within it. So that's about it for Praxis Data Security in a nutshell.
Of course, everybody, last week we broke down Texas' new safe harbor law, SB 2610, and what it means for your business navigating liability, of course, when a breach. And I wanted to have Miss Maria here today because for some people, when you start talking about frameworks or NIST or anything, they just are like, I mean, they want to ostrich themselves and just put their head in the sand and pretend like it doesn't exist. And we here at Tech and Tequila don't believe in that. So let's start out with the basics. So for someone who is just starting this and maybe doesn't really understand what a cybersecurity framework is, what exactly is that and why should you care for your business?
So thank you for bringing up that safe harbor law, and it kind of leads into understanding what that entails and what is a framework. A framework sounds like a lot of work, like you said. What is this and what? It's very just a big idea that doesn't sound very concrete for building an organization, a business. And if you think about it, there are a list of minimum security standards, right? Like there's a list of the minimum things that you need to do to be secure. And how did they come up with that list? Really, they took the sections of the business that are most vulnerable. Again, we all know there's a firewall. So, we talk about how there's security in layers like your house, your building, your security, your doors, your locks, your windows, those things. And it's a way to organize where those minimum security standards lie and what exactly they protect. So they didn't just come up with them arbitrarily. They didn't just go, you know what, these sound good. The reason why it's a framework is because it's an organized way to know what you have, what those standards are, if you're meeting them, and why, and especially it's showing you why they are important. So frameworks, there's all kinds of frameworks. HIPAA has a framework that we follow. Again, it's a framework. It's a way to organize all of those best practices and all of those security standards. And it looks different. So for the safe harbor law, those are the minimum standards. We talk a lot about GLBA, or that Federal Trade Commission law. It is a list of standards. And we use a similar framework because they're very similar to the safe harbor law. A lot of this is redundant, and none of this is completely different, because minimum security standards should be what companies have as a baseline. And different standards require a little bit more or less that is reflected. It is added to that framework. Again, a way to really track what you have and why you have it and where you are in your maturity is by knowing, when we say your gaps, is that you don't have that thing in your framework. So I'm trying to break it down to where it makes the most sense without talking very technical to people, so you understand. Not that anybody's dumb, because I started here too, where when I first heard of a framework, I was like, I really need some understanding of it.
No. And I think for a lot of customers, I say customers, clients, business owners, it can feel very daunting because there are quite a few different frameworks floating around out there. There's NIST, there's CIS, there's ISO. I mean, we would say PCI, but kind of that's more of a standard. But how do you even know, as a business owner, where do I begin and which one should I adopt? Or is there kind of I don't want to say an overarching framework, but is there one thing that you recommend that somebody starts with?
So I think it's important to note that those two frameworks, even though they have similarities of what what the basics are, they are written by two different organizations. So NIST is the National Institute of Standards and Technology. They have been writing frameworks for the government. That's where they really started. And then they realized that businesses needed this, and they've created some that aren't as strenuous as for the government, and they've created some for the general business, for the private sector, to be able to know what their be able to use it within their language. And they wrote a lot of, and it's all free. You can go to NIST and look at this, and they have it's a lot of paperwork, but they have even how to use it. Then we have CIS. CIS is great. CIS was written for businesses, for the private sector. They map to NIST just fine, but the way they implement it is the way they wrote it is to implement in a business that makes more sense. Again, similar things in them. They map to each other. Like CIS has understood that it needed to map. They got a lot of this from NIST, but they have what they call implementation groups. They have implementation group 1, 2, and 3. And it is written so that a company can start their baby steps into implementing these implementation groups without eating the whole elephant all at once. NIST is a whole elephant. It tells you, bam, this is everything that you should have in there. And you would need to know or have somebody like myself or somebody in your organization to really understand this and say, oh, that's not applicable and that's not applicable. And oh, we've decided not to do this. Because as a business owner, you should say, because we're not in compliance and we're only talking about security, you should say, these are the things that are important to my company. And not only are these important, but because we are in retail, privacy, PII things are not, we're not taking any personal data. We're really worried about some of how our network is, secure, things like that. So as a business owner, so when we choose a CIS, then we say we can look and start doing the implementation groups, and it is written more for a business. And those are, again, we have many frameworks. We have the SCF, and there's tons of frameworks that have come out by different organizations, and they're all just as valid. And they just have a different reason for being created for certain industries at times, or because somebody decided, I don't like the way NIST is written, so I think that we need to write it like this. It makes more sense for businesses. But at the end of the day, any framework that's chosen is a good framework for a company.
I think basically what you're saying is start somewhere, because like what we were saying, you cannot ostrich yourself. You can't bury yourself or say it's too high. Now, of course, when you talk about the NIST cybersecurity framework, it's often called the gold standard, but kind of what you were saying, it's kind of like a big mountain or like an elephant to eat. So when you break it down to its core functions, you have identify, protect, detect, respond, and of course, recover. Now, those can guide an overall strategy, but where do you find most businesses should start? Like when they're starting out this idea?
Well, I'm going to add something. The new version of the NIST CSF has govern all the way around it. So I did want to add that in. But what I will say is for all of those control families that you just groups that you have stated, you should have something in each one. One thing in each one of those things. They're there for a reason. We need to identify. You don't know what you what you have to protect if you haven't identified it. You need to protect the things that you know. You need to be able to respond in case something does happen, and you need to be able to get back and running as a business to recover. So all those things that's why they're in a circle. There's not one more important than the other, but you should, for a business to start, you should at least have something in each one of those areas.
No, I really like that, because when you're talking about it being a circle, and we were just talking about this today, which is not necessarily cybersecurity related, but people take for granted their internet connection until their internet doesn't work and they're like, we're stalled out. So, when you think of, beginning this framework process and deciding what to go, what is one of the recommendations that you make for businesses, like just to start out with? Is it identifying everything that they have? Is it starting to fill those gaps? Like, where do you start with your clients?
I think that you're right. We identify first. That's exactly right, because we don't know what we're trying to work with if we don't know what there is. So, but we identify in different levels. The other thing to note about, especially the NIST, and like I said, CIS talks more about just the technical aspects, but we are talking about administrative controls, technical controls, and physical controls. And people lose sight of that administrative side that is so very important. So what we do when we first start is that we identify how the company runs, what is important to them. And then on the technical, that's on the administration. What is it does? What's important to them? What industry you're in? What is your culture like? Right? We identify those things. Do we have processes? Do you have an employee handbook that tells people what your guidelines are? Those are all part of the cyber and even the NIST framework. And then we identify on the technical side, what do you have? Do you have computers, laptops? Does everybody work remotely? Do we have a network, or is it all Microsoft? We identify all of those things. Some companies don't have a brick and mortar. Some do. When you have a brick and mortar, do we have a network? How much smart stuff do we have in what's it connected to? If we don't, are we talking about networks at home? We are identifying all of these things. And again, on the physical side, and I don't want to leave that out, even though we do often, because so many are not brick and mortars. On the brick and mortars, like, do you keep doors locked? You still have to worry about that when we're talking about employees taking these laptops and physically putting them in a safe place. And is that covered in a handbook? So you see, they're all kind of intertwining. So I don't want to lose track, but yes, identifying all of these things before we start anything, because we don't know what we're protecting if we don't know what we have.
No, and I really like that you pointed out, there's going to be a different, let's say, set of requirements for if you don't have employees that are per se in a brick and mortar, but sometimes it really is that physical, like, security that can make a world of difference. Like, obviously, I cannot tell you the number of times we've had something with one of our clients go off or something happen and come to find out, oh, well, their data room's not locked, it's not secure, and somebody unplugged something or somebody accidentally walked over something, and we've all seen it. So there was something that you covered just a little while ago, that a framework is definitely different than compliance requirements, but they kind of almost go hand in hand. Can you kind of explain that a little bit better?
Yeah, I'll use HIPAA as an example, but before I do that, I will say that there is security for your company, and that is what's important. And we talk about the risk, and we're trying to lower the risk of cyber incidents in your organization, whether it's your organization is 2 people, 5 people, 2,000 people. And then we have compliance. So I like people to understand about compliance is that compliance doesn't necessarily care about the security of your organization as a whole. It worries about a certain type of data set. So I would say HIPAA. HIPAA is worried about both PHI and PII. Your administrative controls on how you handle your finances is not HIPAA's problem. HIPAA is worried about protecting your PHI and PII, and that is what's important. When we are talking about PCI doesn't care about anything about that except for that credit card data. If there's a breach in your organization that doesn't affect your credit card data, then you don't have any PCI repercussions. So, and vice versa, you could have, because in PCI, there's a lot of times it's just better to have it on its own network. And let's say your company's goes crazy, you have an incident, but not this network that you had PCI compliant and it's completely secure. Well, then you're great with PCI, but you're not great with the security of your company. And so that is what I would really like people to understand of why those are so different, is because the security is the security of your company, and compliance is, again, and it could be a regulatory compliance. You could do a compliance that does talk about your entire organization. Like if you want to get a SOC 1 or a SOC 2, then your organization is compliant to that, and it does meet a lot of your security. It is a security framework that is the basis of that SOC. So there's that. And how does it all come together? So with the HIPAA example, you could have best practices, and a lot of the times those best practices, if you implement it across your entire organization, aligns, like meets like this with your HIPAA. You may have to add a few administrative controls to make sure that your organization is secure outside of PII and PHI for your intellectual property or for, how your organization runs. But HIPAA is a lot of minimum requirements that everybody should have, but with the focus of protecting that PII and not your entire organization. I hope I answered the question.
No.
Did you have clarification?
No, I think that really answered it well, because I think that there's a lot of people like, oh, well, I'm compliant on my HIPAA side, but then something happens and they're like, well, I followed this. Why did this not work? And the thing is, I think what you answered is HIPAA is really only concerned about data that's about PII or covering, like, particularly more, to be honest with you, the client versus you as a business entity. Whereas, when you look at an actual framework, it's how am I protecting my business as a whole versus just this one section, right?
Even if you protect, you say, you know what, I really want to be HIPAA compliant. We're going to put all of our PII, PHI here, and all those controls around this, and anybody who touches that data will be here. But our company is not really following that. But we're good, because we're good with over here. This side needs to also follow something for security, or it's just left out in the open.
Well, I mean, I always tell my clients it's what's between the floor, like what is between the floor and the device, or the floor and the computer, of course, is your first line of defense. And so you really need to be training your employees. They need to be aware of threats and policies and procedures, kind of like what's in your handbook. Are they aware of this? And I can think from personal experiences at different places where you walk into a business and they're like, oh no, we safeguard our passwords. We safeguard this. And you'll notice they've got like passwords written here, or they've got credit cards written down on sticky notes. And you're like, well, you may say that, but that's not what's actually going on here. So, yeah.
I think that one thing for business owners, and if we're, when I talk to a business owner, I don't like this being like, oh, yes, but I understand how business owners think a lot of the times. And in those policies and procedures, just like the example that you gave, when we have now cyber insurance policies, and we have just like the new law, that the safe harbor law, if it hasn't been documented, then it doesn't exist. So you may say, oh my gosh, but we tell our employees this. If it wasn't documented, it doesn't exist. If you can't give proof if an incident happens and they come in to look at it. So there's that. But there's also, and this is the part where I'm like, the liability. And business owners, that is kind of their language, is really not having less liability, less risk. It all kind of goes together. So if you in your handbook have, you're telling your employees how to use the technology, what their guidelines are, and then you have them sign that they are aware, that is shifting the liability, because you as an organization have done your due diligence to train and tell your employees. And with the credit cards and those, if you have it on there, we do not write them down, but they still wrote them down. There's obviously there's repercussions for an employee, and you have your own sanction policy. Sanction policies are also part of best practices, but then if there is an incident and you have it written down, but they come in and see you have now shifted liability, that the business has done the due diligence, has done everything right, and does shift that liability to the individual employees, that they must do the right thing. But then we go into, that's why we have a lot of training for our employees, so they know, they can't say, well, we didn't know, we weren't told. And then you have all the training. So that's the what I like to call maybe the ugly underbelly of some of the reasoning to have this in place. But I'd like to think that it's mainly because we really like to secure our organizations and run. And it actually has us run more smoothly.
No, I can definitely agree. And, obviously last week we covered SB 26, which is a safe harbor law for small businesses, SMB. And I thought part of what is interesting, of course, is that depending on how many employees you have, depends on the framework that they recommend. So Do you see kind of like in the future more laws like this being put in place to protect businesses, as well as kind of, I know we talked about shifting liability, but these frameworks help better prepare businesses?
Yes, I do. I mean, I think that's the other thing that the United States especially has realized is that most organizations don't pay attention to security unless it is a compliance, unless they want to get into an industry. And what these safe harbor laws are really being the carrot model, you know, and it's that carrot at the end of the stick of, if you do this, you know, keep following this. So that's, I think, why they're starting to give, what's the word I'm looking for? Incentives. They're starting to give incentives to people to do the right thing instead of just asking to do the right thing. They're still asking. They cannot tell every organization in the world to put in, security measures, but now they're coming up with incentives so that they get done.
Yeah, I was going to say to use an old school model, the stick versus the carrot, because I think when you look at, some other countries and some other places, they really have some very big sticks in place where it's like, if you don't do this, and I'm trying to think if there's one that's like for people in retail, if you have a breach and you do not notify the EU within 24 hours, I mean, the minute that like within your organization, you have, I think it's 24 hours to notify them. And if you surpass that, there are like fines that immediately begin as of that. And it can get super crazy expensive. But let's switch this. We don't want to talk a lot about sticks. We want to talk more about carrots. So is there a good kind of like real world example of someone that you've worked with where you have been able to go in and help them successfully like level up their security framework and really like, we started here and now we're here?
Yes. I'm like, yes. I actually just did a very similar like fireside chat with one of those very very successful partnerships. So we had and I'm very happy to say that I have many of an organizations that we've leveled up, and it makes us so happy, and we continue to have relationships. Sometimes they age out from us because they grow, and they want to start having in-house. So we're very happy to know that their business is flourishing and they are taking security seriously, and they've started to hire in-house. But one of my favorite clients is actually in the Dallas-Fort Worth area. And when they came to us, they were very, I had met them 2 years prior, and they bought a business, and then they were trying to figure something out, and they're like, we're going to call Praxis. So they called, and they went from, and again, we are now friends, and they always got upset because we did their risk, and they were like, how do we lower our risk? And we helped them with their plan of action and milestone. And every time they're like, well, what should we do? And I'd say, well, I don't know. That's a risk-based business decision. Let's talk about it. And he would say, can't you just tell us? I'm like, I can't. This is your business and how you want to run it and your budgets. So let's have those conversations. And they got to the point of maturity that, and they are basically a retailer with some services, and they decided they wanted to implement the zero trust. And they got to the point of maturity after 2 years of working together, where it was a natural next step for them. But they were able to. We had these conversations of the risk and what it meant, and they put in a zero trust in the Microsoft environment, and the only thing is that they didn't govern it. And we laughed because they're like, oh no, we're good now. Like we got them together with their another IT company that they had won. We helped them switch through, and then we brought in another partner that helped them with the zero trust, and everything was great. And they're like, Maria, I think we got this. Praxis, we're great. And then they called us and they're like, we have a problem. We didn't set up governance. And because of that, even a lot of their stuff drifted because they weren't doing checks and balances, and they had an incident that was all it was social engineering, and they didn't put they didn't put the governance in place, and then they came back, and we're on year 4 of a partnership, and they're like, so let's talk about this governance. So it's baby steps, but from where they started to zero trust, learning lessons, us being next to them, I can gladly say that today they're a very different company, secure wise. And since then, they've also been opening branches all over the place. So, and we've kind of helped them through that as well.
No, and I think that really leads into the next thing that I was going to talk about, because you and I both know that these cyber threats are not slowing down. If anything, they're getting more, like I always say, like you think about back in the day, you get the email letters or whatever, and they had tons of grammatical errors, and now they're like closer and closer, and they look so much better, The thing is, when you put like zero trust or you put a framework in place, kind of like what you're talking about, is it gives a business more a fighting chance against some of these things. We're not saying that, they may never, ever happen, but you're CYAing yourself a little bit with these frameworks to be better prepared, So I think with that, kind of looking ahead, of course, with AI, IoT, and of course, remote work expanding, how do you see these frameworks expanding, or how do you see frameworks, laws, things like that changing in the near future?
So I don't see them changing very much. The frameworks go through life cycles. NIST has life cycles for their frameworks where they get renewed, revamped every few years. If you go on the website, you can see. So the NIST CSF recently, it was I think last year that they did their revision, and they have a cycle for all of those frameworks. CIS, I know the guys over there pretty okay, and they are working. They're on version 8 right now, and so they don't change as much as you think. They get revised to the new threats. But that's been happening for a while. The difference is that people are finally talking about them. Organizations are finally implementing them. So we're hearing about them so much more. HIPAA is going through its revision. 2024 had a new changes in it, and there's proposed changes for 2025. And it's all because of the change of the times. When HIPAA was started, there was remote work and all those things. And so it has to get revised to change. There has to be governance on those as well. So I don't see them changing drastically. I'm seeing more people and more organizations implementing them and them being talked about a lot more.
So really versus it being like a complete wipeout and revamp, it's more like an adjustment to the times of what we're going in. And I think if there's a couple of things to sum up this whole discussion is, number one, as a business owner, as somebody who is in charge of this for a business, is, you can't bury your head in the sand. You got to start somewhere. And I know we've talked a little bit in depth before about, like, for some of these compliance, not a framework, it's not about having everything perfectly implemented at the time that something happens. It's about having everything written down and having a roadmap available so they know what you're working towards, that keeps you from getting some of those like naughty fines and stuff like that. So I think if there was any, like, I would say last words of wisdoms or something that you could tell somebody who's really starting on this journey or has gone into an organization and says, we have this vast breadth of problems right here, what would that be from your perspective?
Well, if it's somebody or an organization that wants to get started, I would say don't get overwhelmed because that is what happens. They look at it and go, you probably have more in place than you think. I also talk to people that say, well, we have everything in place and they have nothing. So be realistic. You probably have more in place than you think. But you need to start with the baby step of, like we said earlier, identifying and choosing a framework. Let's start there. Once we get there, then we kind of go through the nitty gritty of going line by line of what those requirements are and seeing where we are with it. And again, one thing that I hear a lot when I come in and do an assessment, and I have been an auditor before, so I have been in the auditing shoes where, I'm there to like find the problem. But on the assessment, on the side of us trying to get, don't be defensive. We're just trying to figure out where you are so we can get to the right place. It's like going to the doctor. Like, I hate going to the doctor because I don't want to hear anything's wrong. But if something's wrong, I need to know so I can cure it. That same thing. So don't get overwhelmed. Let's start there and choosing a framework. That will be step one. With that, we're doing a lot, and then start taking actions past that.
No, I love it. You got to start with those little baby steps to get from point A to point B. And I think really what you were talking about, identifying what you have is that's step number one, because, kind of what you said, what you don't know, you don't know. Well, obviously, first and foremost, thank you so much for joining me today, Maria. If somebody wanted to work with you in the future, what's the best way for them to get in touch with you so that you can obviously utilize your zone of genius to help them up-level their framework?
The best way to reach me is either through email or through LinkedIn. And really, even if I will encourage everybody that listens to your podcast, even if you don't want to engage and you just have questions and you're not ready and you want to understand something, I love to answer questions and I love to put people on the right path. So even if you have a question, please don't hesitate to call. I get a lot of, we think we're this, and what ends up happening, I understand the requirement. I'm like, oh, you don't need that at all. You just, that's not really where you needed to be. And that's too overwhelming. You can just do this, document that, and you'll be fine. So, I either way that you want to reach me, that'd be great. And if you have any questions, feel free.
Well, like I said, once again, thank you so much for joining us today. And thank you for answering those questions. You've given us lots of knowledge, lots of things to think about. And of course, feel free to reach out to Maria. We will put her email and her information in the show notes. And she is also very active on the LinkedIn. As we leave this episode, if you don't take anything away from it, I want you to take away that frameworks aren't just about one thing. And they're about starting something, building resistance, protecting your business as well as your clients, and setting your business up for success in the future. You have to start somewhere, right? You got to pick somewhere and start and move forward. And of course, don't forget to mark your calendars for October 23rd and 24th and join me for the Latinas in Podcasting Virtual Summit. The link will be in the show notes. I cannot wait to see you guys. So, of course, until next time, I'm your techie chica, Kat Lopez Shelby, and this is Tech and Tequila, where we mix a little bit of business with a little bit of tech and always get great information, and we have a great time. So thank you.
Thank you so much for tuning in to today's episode of Tech and Tequila. I hope you enjoyed our conversation today. To stay updated about all things tech and more, don't forget to visit us at our website, shelbyts.com. If you loved what you heard, remember to show your support by liking, sharing, and subscribing to our podcast. Your 5-star ratings and reviews mean the world to us and help us to reach more listeners just like you. So muchas gracias again for joining us with Tech and Tequila. Thank you so much. You learned a lot about tech, and maybe you had a nice drink of tequila.